Hello and welcome to our very first Tuesday talk with Ruby Reese. We will shortly be joined by our very first guest, Catherine from Snout and About. So we'll just wait a moment for her to join the live. And I believe I should be able to send an invite in a second. So bear with us a moment. I think Catherine is on the line. How are you doing, Catherine?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
Very good. Would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself?
I will, of course. And first, I will apologise. My boy Indy is in the background having a chew, and he's quite a noisy eater. So keep it real. My name is Catherine Griffin. I am the founder of the Cork Canine Behaviour Consultancy, but most people would know as Snout and About. So myself, I'm based in Cork with my trainer Gillian, and we have a branch in Kerry, and we work with a variety of dogs and people and different organisations to help support their dogs through behaviour challenges.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'll give a very quick introduction as well. So I'm Cillian O'Keefe from Ruby Reese. We are also based in Cork, a dog brand set up almost a year ago. And we set it up because our own dog, Ruby, our French bulldog, has sensitive tummy, sensitive skin, basically has everything. And we decided we wanted to bring out products that are suitable for lots and lots of dogs. So without any further ado, I guess we could launch into our Tuesday talk. So this series is set out to be conversational. It is not considered advice. It's supposed to be entertaining. We learn so much in the dog community anytime we leave the house and speak with experts like yourself, Catherine. And I'm really looking forward to learning lots tonight and over the next couple of weeks on various topics. But if someone does have concerns about their dog, they should be assessed by a certified professional. So you've chosen a mammoth topic to talk to us about tonight. It's all about dog training from a dog trainer perspective. So what is a dog trainer? I mean, I guess I've taught Ruby some tricks at home. Does that make me a handler? Does that make me a trainer? What does? Let's maybe look at the word dog trainer. What's that all about?
Okay, well, that makes you a dog daddy for a start, and I'm a dog mommy, and I'm proud. So, yeah, it's funny, the word trainer, and I wanted to talk about this because I get asked so much by my clients and by people I meet, and having been in the industry such a long time, it's been so interesting to see how it's evolved and the shift. So there's a question we always get asked is what's the difference between a trainer and a behaviour consultant and a behaviourist? And as the industry isn't regulated, there's no definite clear set sort of definition of what a trainer is or versus what a behaviour consultant is. But the way I like to see it, and many of my peers would coin the term training to be a dog trainer, we would ordinarily associate that with people who are teaching dogs new patterns of behaviour. So I would think of a trainer as maybe somebody who's teaching dogs in particular dog sports, such as agility or man training and that kind of thing. Maybe guide dogs, assistant dogs, dogs that are they have no pre-existing behaviour that requires modification. So we're teaching them new behaviours on top of that. Mm-hmm. In order to do that, you need to have a really good grasp and understanding of behaviour and the mechanics of behaviour and how that works. And so when you work in the field specifically more with behaviour, it's more to do with identifying problematic or kind of unwanted behaviours, so to speak, and how we work to modify that by investigating the root cause and then changing the behaviour into something else rather than building an entirely new behaviour off of a kind of baseline foundation. But the two are very interchangeable.
Yes. And I'm guessing routines are a really important thing when you're talking about modifying behavior then, right? And maybe we're jumping into this too quickly, but I think routine is something that I know Ruby likes, and I'm guessing lots of dogs like routine, right?
Yeah, it's so funny you should say that. I was literally weirdly just thinking about routine today because my own boy's routine was out of whack. And I was thinking about how much we talk about our dogs needing routine all the time. Now, loads of studies have been done into predictability for animals, and to know an event is about to occur dramatically reduces the risk of too much stress happening in the system. So knowing what's about to happen next, knowing when I'm going to be fed, knowing when I'm going to be walked is important. And it does help. So setting good routines for our dogs, especially when we're modifying behavior, is really super important. But routine can also be we're not routine. There are two ends to that lead. There's a human end too. So my boy's routine today was thrown out of whack because the time I normally take him out for a walk, I was actually with a client, and I came home to a very agitated Malinois Shepherd mix.
Sure.
Why haven't you walked me? So I was like, oh, I've got too much routine. So there's a fine line with that.
And when you mentioned, you've already touched on the point, the human aspect, because obviously we have a huge impact on our dogs' lives and how they perceive the world and how their world is structured. So I'm wondering, as a dog trainer, are you also training the owners? Is it the dog that needs the training or the owner? I think this is probably a topic that comes up quite a lot.
Yeah, a lot. And it's the first thing I always say to anybody who's interested in getting into the industry. You've got to love people. You've got to love working with people. And I think a lot of people get into the industry because they love animals, and I'm the same. But you are working so much with people and being support to them, because ultimately when you're working in training, we don't take the animal away from the place where it feels safe and secure and teach it a load of new behaviors and give it back all shiny and clean. It's not a car that you send off to the mechanics to get its problems fixed. So it's very much about assessing what the animal needs and then working with the owners to impart your skills and knowledge and expertise, especially when it comes to timing and training mechanics. We've got to show the owners how to do that. And dogs will work very differently for me compared to working for their owner. And that's not necessarily got anything to do with having any great particular natural ability with the dog. It's usually because A, I'm novel, so I'm new and exciting, so there's already going to be interest generated there. And B, it doesn't have a previous history of learning with me.
Sure.
And then sometimes we see them work a lot with their parents because they have that relationship piece as well. So yeah, there's lots to think about there. If anybody is looking to get into the industry, it's really about building those interpersonal skills with people and making them feel supported and not chastised or that they're a bad dog parent, but for having a real empathy and understanding of where they're at. Because most people come to me when they're at the last straw, like this is our last thing before. Yeah, and absolutely, yeah.
So I guess, so you said like the human skills and the personal skills. What other skills would you say? So I'm sitting at home now and I'm thinking, wow, this sounds great. I'd love to be a trainer. What type of skills should I really have on top of, of those personal skills? I'm guessing you have to be a good listener as well to understand the root causes and the whole situation. What type of other skills would you say that are essential for a trainer?
The first thing to remember is, like in teaching our dogs new patterns of behaviors, we can learn new patterns of behaviors and new skills too. And I always say to my clients, if I'm trying to teach them mechanical training skills, I remember when I was at Bristol University in front of one of my idols, Dr. Emily Blackwell, and trying to grasp the mechanics of classical conditioning training. It's very much hand, eye, mouth coordination stuff and being really visually acute and aware. It's terrible. Rubbish. But you practice and you build these skills. So I think for a lot of people, you definitely have to, if you want to work with dogs, you will be working with people, as I said. That's hugely important that you can understand that. And I think from a skill perspective, the rest of it really, when it comes to mechanics and the ability to identify or investigate underlying root causes, a lot of that's actually just through the education part as well. And I am a fan of, as most people know, regulation of the industry. Having something behind you to say, I understand the mechanics of behavior and how it works. And um, there's lots of options out there at the moment where people can start getting that initial education piece. So I think getting the initial education behind it. Now, the problem is, and again, I'm a huge advocate for financial not having financial barriers to education. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, these things still exist, but there are some fantastic places that you can go to start that education off. And it's great because, one of my absolute favorite educational institutions for canine behavior in the whole world is Irish, and they're based up in Dublin. So, and that's Annie Ed. Anne Rogers founded them. So if anybody's interested in starting off that education piece, that's a great place to start.
Absolutely. I started, and because we meet each other at events all the time, so you know how busy we all are in the doggy world at the moment. And I think a lot of our audiences will also be very, very well aware of all the amazing events that are going on. But I actually started in at the end of Christmas doing an Annie Ed course in canine nutrition. Absolutely brilliant. There's mountains of information, and there's so much to learn. I must say that I've fallen way behind on, but I totally agree with you. Really, really amazing value courses.
Yeah, yeah. I did that one too.
Oh, amazing! Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I managed to find the time to finish it. But so you've mentioned accreditations and things like that. Tell us more about the accreditations, and do different accrediting bodies subscribe to different schools of thought? I know you mentioned classical training. Are they kind of associated with something? There's positive reinforcement. There's lots of I don't want to say jargon, but industry buzzwords. And I'm wondering, do the accrediting bodies then subscribe heavily towards different types of styles of training?
Yeah, it's an interesting one again. So there are lots of different accrediting bodies, and I think who you choose is, they have to fit with your own moral principles and values, whoever you choose. Mm-hmm. So they every institution or accrediting body, or like they kind of work as an umbrella, I suppose, for trainers and behavior professionals and other aspects of the industry as well. They're all going to have their own set of ethics, their code of ethics, which will subscribe to what type of avenue you're going to go down. And I think like the main ones, like I'm accredited with the IAABC, which is the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. Mm-hmm. And then you also get IMDT, APDT, and all these acronyms that make your head want to explode. So, and the reason I went for IABC is they're not just dogs, they're animal in general, and they're very heavily invested in understanding research, carrying out some aspects of research themselves. And it's not just about the animal side either. They very much look into being really inclusive in the varying communities that they work within for people. And they promote a lot of community and inclusivity and have a very just really, really good code of ethics that they stand by. So there are different ones that you can look at. And I think from my perspective, I find the IABC that little bit more invested in behavior. And it's run by behavior professionals. And a lot of these organizations or accrediting bodies were originally established by the veterinary community, which is actually very, very different and kind of a different thing. But yeah, it's a funny one when we talk about the different styles of training and things out there that are available. And this really does just boil down to the fact there's no regulation in the industry. Mm-hmm. As much as we talk about being evidence-based, or some people call themselves science-based trainers, like there's simply not enough science or evidence out there that's going to be conclusive to call ourselves something like that. And we forget, like, science is essentially an evolving process.
And behavior is so nuanced as well. I mean,
yeah.
I'm wondering, I suppose certain methods might be effective, but there might be more effective alternatives out there. would that be, I guess it's a spectrum, right? For example, heavily rewarding a behavior could work better or worse depending on the situation than, say, punishment. I don't know if I'm pushing towards I'm not a trainer, so like, do we want to broach the topic of rewarding and punishing? Are these is this old fashioned now, that kind of dichotomy, or
Yeah,
what are your
it's such a hot topic. I actually love talking about it, and I'm always inviting members from the training community whose methods aren't the same as mine necessarily to have the conversation, because until you learn and understand other people's viewpoints and open up that communication line, you're closing yourself off to so much knowledge and information. So I think opening up those conversations with other people in the industry is really, really important. And I'm personally completely allergic to the word positive reinforcement in a sense. I think everybody knows at this stage my training methods are in line with being welfare centric and to ensure the best outcomes for the animal. I don't use any tools. I tend to focus everything on ensuring that we're encouraging and supporting the animal to make the right decisions and choices. And yeah, paying them well when they do, for sure. But I think, again, the problem in the industry is a lot of these buzzwords, the lack of regulation, and it's such an emotional industry. When you're in it, you care so much for the dogs you're working with, and you care so much for the humans that you're working with. And when we talk about things like punishment or reinforcement, these are just technical words. Like,
sure,
none of us can be positive reinforcement trainers, because withholding a treat for a tiny bit is essentially punishing to a dog. So if I'm asking a dog to throw out a behavior, and I'm withholding a treat for a little while to like push a little bit of stress to get them thinking a little bit more acutely, which is the sweet spot where learning occurs. You have a look, for anybody tuned in, look up the Yerkes-Dodson law effect. It's essentially an elevation of stress and arousal, tiniest little bit, and then they learn brilliantly. It's the best place to get them into. And we often see this is achieved by unduly putting the animal ultimately under a little bit of stress. If I withhold food from Indy, he's like, oh, what is it I need to do? So,
Yeah.
and it's a bit of a tricky one. So obviously, when we look at the progression of the industry, and I think what's an important fact to remember is punishment training works, reinforcing behaviors works, punishing them works. It all works, and this is all based on Skinner's kind of quadrant that he had, and that's flawed in itself. It's a very mechanical, structured setting. We are working with sentient animals. There is so much else going on that's not just you do route A, B, C, or D. There's loads of different aspects to this. So ultimately, the choice that people want to make and how they feel about using punishment, and science says punishment, short-term, strong punishment technique can be more effective in some instances than long-term drawing out of trying to build and reinforce new behaviors. But that's going to bring, and that's just the facts, that's what stuff says. But obviously, if you're looking at creating the most punishing scenario possible for an animal, how do we actually do that, bearing in mind all the different nuances of behavior, all the risks associated with doing that, and all the potential future risks, as well as the potential to not get it absolutely bang on right, and then we've completely screwed our dog up. There's too much risk. And I think what we should be focusing on is the welfare of the animal and minimal risk for the animal or for other people. So I know a lot of people who work in like high-end aggression cases, which is myself included, we see through TikTok and all this stuff, there's a lot of punishment used in those instances. And the risk of using high-end punishment techniques in those instances is, that it just carries way too much risk. And there's way too much going on. So I think people need to have a look at what they think. And really importantly, make their own mind up. So I'm a big fan of people who sit on the fence and get as much. That's why I employed my trainer, because she grilled me.
Yeah.
over it all. And I was like, I love this. It was so much interest in understanding both sides and all the different grey and dark grey, light grey areas in between to understand and come up to your own conclusions about what you think is the best way to go forward based on all the evidence and information you've collected.
Yes, and I suppose it's something that we as a whole doggy community need to do more of, is just be curious about people that have differing opinions to ourselves, because until you speak to these people, you don't know how much you don't know, right? It's you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. So it's I think stay curious is definitely a big thing, and I suppose it's very, very topical because it was all over the newspapers in the last couple of weeks. The UK brought in a ban on the e-collars, these shock collars. It's not something I've ever used, so I'm not very familiar with them. Is that something that that we're celebrating? Is this something that we'd love to see in Ireland, or is this maybe taking away a potential tool? What's your view on it? What have you heard going on in the trainer community recently about this news?
Yeah, I've heard a lot. Obviously, it's a very important topic for everybody. And yeah, myself, like I don't use tools like that in my work. And I think one of the biggest worries and concerns is obviously livestock worrying is the one thing that most people would talk about in these instances. But there are other avenues. I mean, I personally, my ethical standpoint is I've never been in a situation where I've needed to use an e-collar on a dog. And I think I would love to, and love to for anybody in the industry who is worried about which way they go, and to people in the UK as well, to open up conversations about the types of dogs and behaviours they're working with and how we can actually do that without use of an e-collar. Because if that's what you've always used, of course it's going to be quite difficult to understand how to step away from that, especially in an industry that can be quite cutthroat when we're working on using different methods. But I read a really interesting article recently because it's been banned in Wales for ages, and Wales is seriously agricultural as well. And they were looking at the increase in attacks on sheep since the ban came into effect. But then they measured it against UK statistics, and there was also an increase in livestock attacks. So, and it didn't correlate with the exact time that the collar was banned. And then they started looking at the statistics for where we saw sharper increases. What I found really interesting is, and again, this is theoretical, but it's quite an interesting theory, and the statistics you add up if you look into them, was that it was actually to do with the rise of Airbnb.
Oh,
and
really?
Airbnb suddenly being in loads of rural areas, people, I'm always Airbnb with my boy. Suddenly dogs who are, and owners are just walking around the countryside, staying in their beautiful cabins and just letting their dogs run amok, ultimately increasing in sheep attacks around livestock. And I think, and I have a lot of friends who are farmers with livestock and land, and it is such a worry for them, seeing those off-lead dogs. And I think you hear a lot of talk about it. So people saying, so you'd rather have a dog shot dead than use an e-collar. No, put your dog on a bloody lead. Yeah. Don't let your dog off around livestock. End of story. If you care for the safety and welfare and love of your dog, don't leave them off around livestock unless you have a working collie and you're working that dog.
Yeah.
And you own the sheep. Don't leave them off around livestock. Ultimately, there are ways around this. So I personally think it's great because we do see a lot of e-collars used by people who are simply teaching their dog not to react and bark to other dogs. People using e-collars to teach dogs not to jump on things, or we see people using e-collars for dogs who are barking excessively. And someone just said a lot of e-collars have a beep tone, which can be helpful. And that is interesting. And we can use tones for sure. We can use audible cues for working with dogs. They can be quite helpful.
And presumably these have not been banned, correct? I mean, the ones that would have a tone. It's the electric shock part of the collar that's the banned bit now in the UK, right?
Presumably. Yeah. Now I've not worked with beep collars. I've made a makeshift beepy collar with a beeper on it that you can make it go that I've used previously for working with a blind dog. But no, not anything with an electric shock running through, and you teach a specific behavior to the sound of the boop boop that can just help. But I think I think if the biggest worry is livestock with the e-collar, then we just need to keep our dogs on lead around livestock. Can't be that simple about it. And Ireland doesn't have as many public pathways as the UK does anyway. So it's quite easy not to accidentally leave your dog off around livestock. And we know if you're hiking through the mountains, there's going to be sheep or goats there. Keep your dog
Yeah.
in a lead. Keep your dog safe and keep the livestock safe. Um, and yeah, I think the collars can fall into hands. Yeah, like I said, I've had clients come to me whose dogs have been through training using an e-collar to stop them reacting at dogs when the dog's fearful. So if you're in a fearful and anxious state and you're electrocuted, it's not good.
No,
Or like I
not
said,
at
for dogs barking at the window at home, giving them a buzz. For that, like that's not how we really look at modifying behavior these days. And it's great because, as you were saying about the old school training versus new, and we are seeing a lot of progression moving forward
yeah.
where we're going, oh, actually, we can do things differently. And a lot of people say there's right and wrong ways and of using e-collars or punishment-based training. And like I said, if punishment is substantial enough to the animal, it can work, and that's the thing. But the risk associated to the animal's welfare or the potential for fallout behavior further down the line is way too high. And in an industry where training isn't regulated, the fact that any Joe Blogs can get an e-collar and put them on a dog and zap it away every time it does something they don't like is that's not training. That's not training.
And I even feel
That's trying to control an animal. And
yeah.
I talk so much to them. Sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. I love cutting across anyway. The like I think even in the modern world of dog owners, especially just speaking about Ireland, anyone that I know, I think would have huge problems. Even if the best trainer around said that the best way to get your dog sorted out is to give them electrical shocks, or a second best is to give them treats or whatever, or affection or whatever it is for doing the right thing. I think the easier sell is clear to all of us, and I think it's definitely the easier option, even from an us point of view, because there's no way I'd be going shocking Ruby. No, I suppose
Yeah.
like you say, it's for very high risk situations.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I completely agree. And that's why I always say, read the research, know exactly what you're doing. And when we're working with aversion based training, you need such an in-depth understanding of neurology and physiology and all of that kind of thing before going down that route. And I always like to think of the fact that if we can teach a lion behaviors using a clicker
yeah,
and little bits of meat, we can teach our dogs behaviors. And I've told you my boy's story. He was one of those high risk dogs, and we managed to do an awful lot. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people have to understand as well. We shouldn't just be focusing on the behaviors the animal's presenting with.
mhm,
That's just putting a band-aid over something. We look at what's causing the behaviors, what emotional state, and why that emotional state is existing. And that's where we essentially work from to modify the behavior from the bottom up to the top.
absolutely. No, that's brilliant. And I think so. There's a couple of people popped in here as well as I saw in the comments. So one, we don't know if the vibrating collars were banned, do we? I certainly don't.
Do you know what? I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look into that. So sorry, but I'll have a look into
Yeah.
that and post some information up on our page perhaps once I find it.
And for the person that asked if we can post it up afterwards, absolutely, I'll be posting this afterwards so that others can have a look as well. I have two more questions for you. One is specific to the trainers, and one is for ourselves, the Joe Soaps at home with the family dog. So, for trainers, what will be the best first steps to get into the world of training and figure out? I know you mentioned affordable courses to get in. Is it common in the industry to do internships or shadowing for a day? Is it going along to events? Like what first steps should a someone that's interested, say, in exploring the world of training, what would be a good way to go apart from going into a certificate?
Okay, so I always think one of the best things to do is, to contact people in the industry first and say, how do I get into this? Because everyone's taken different routes. And it normally all starts because someone has a dog that's been really difficult and they've needed help with them. I always think it's a really good idea to, as I said, try and look into a good course. And if anybody wanted further information on books or reading or good things like that to get into, just to start feeding your understanding, by all means, get onto me. And I'll send you a link or a list of books to start reading and understanding about. Have a look at the courses that are available out there. So as I said, in Ireland, we have AniEd. Now, you know from AniEd doing it yourself. It's a bit of an academic deep dive. So if you're not someone who does well with higher level academia type stuff, and don't learn as well that way by having to do it that way, there may be other sort of simpler starter courses to get you going on it. But I know through that course as well, they're incredibly supportive. Credence, who are port based, do some good online courses too. And then the IAABC do really, really good courses as well. So that's a good thing to look into, just to start feeding your knowledge, and not necessarily to get points or accreditation, but just to have a good structure to what you need to learn. And if you're fortunate enough to live somewhere near one of the larger dog shelters and organizations, they can be a really good place to go. So, I mean, I started off working with Dogs Trust for a very long time. And for a lot of the volunteers there, we'd buddy them up with some of the experienced trainers or with the people on the behavior team if they ever had any questions. So that can be a good way to sort of understand it. And actually working in kennels is a great place to start, because you see every behavior at its absolute worst, because it is a very stressful environment for an animal to be in. You get to learn lots about safe handling and reading body language. So doing a bit of volunteer work can be really helpful too. Some places will offer internships. I don't know if they still do, but for anybody in Dublin, Positive Dog Training in Dublin, big fans of them. They're fabulous. And I know they used to offer internships for people wanting to learn more. So some of the training groups might do that. I've been approached a lot about doing internships and having people shadow. Not quite appropriate for the kind of dogs I'm working with. For a first time, that would be more appropriate for people looking to get more into the behavior side who've already got that behind them. But there are bound to be people out there who definitely will be able to help. And I think it's just, for all the academic knowledge you can gather, that hands-on experience piece where you're actually genuinely having to read and understand the dog and work out the different nuances, because every dog is going to act and respond completely differently. So it's really about building up that experience, and keep your eyes out for great jobs available. There's a lot of places that offer. We're seeing so many more places looking for people to join their teams in terms of working with dogs. If you're working in the shelter environment, for example, sorry, I can just hear my dog making funny noises.
No problem. And you mentioned stressful situations. We've got a lot. So this is the final question that I wanted to ask on behalf of everyone here at home. Summer is coming. We've got all these events coming up. We've seen, for example, pups in the park. Lots of people going maybe for the first time out with their dog to a large doggy event where there's lots of sights and sounds and smells. In the first couple of minutes at an event like this, and it doesn't have to be that, it can be going along to a busy park on the first proper warm day of the year. When you're bringing a dog along to a high stress situation, what can we keep in mind so that we can make that experience a lot better for our dogs, and make it a positive experience for everyone. I think it must be critical the first few minutes of these events in particular. What would you recommend to us for all of these types of events coming up?
And it's an interesting one, because I actually saw quite a few of my clients at these events, and and I see them in distance, like, oh, you're here, really? Okay. And they said afterwards, like, oh my God, my dog was so good. She was there for 3 hours, or he was there for 3 hours and did really, really well. It's working in my industry makes you seem like the bad, wicked witch. Was it the West Indies? of the South Cork.
Yeah.
So it kind of has to kind of be a bit like the fun police in these situations.
Yeah.
Dogs who are climatized and socialized to these environments and do well in busy um, environments like these big events, and they're quite used to them, that's something that we want to build up to. Those dogs do exist, absolutely. Your little girl, for example, she's well used to these things. My colleague Claire, Snout and About Kerry, she bought her boy Gus, who was well used to these things, very relaxed. But we do see they can be quite overwhelming and stressful for a lot of dogs. And um, we can see a lot of dogs seemingly acting like they're coping. But when you think of that from the dog's perspective, normally on their walks, not that great around dogs, a bit reactive, or, taking little pops at certain types of dogs. And then all of a sudden there's 100 or 200 dogs around them. What actually happens is they go into a little bit of a state of emotional suppression. From a survival perspective, it's not in the animal's best interest to kick
Yeah.
up a fight when there's 200 other animals. Even your scaldiest, rowdiest friend in the pub might keep his mouth shut if there's like 50 big blokes around him, because you're
Yeah.
not going to take that risk.
Yeah.
So that is not the behavioral professional definition of this behavior. But so we often see our dogs thinking that they're coping in these very busy environments, and then we might see fallouts in behavior the next day. So ultimately, number one thing you need to bring with you is a treat pouch, and plan your day. Plan it for maybe the quieter times of the day, which is usually the very beginning or the very end.
Mm-hmm.
Keep an eye on their behavior and give them time out to sort of large, grassy, open spaces so they can sniff, relax, decompress a little bit without other dogs being on top of them all the time. And use your treat pouch to basically ask them for a few known behaviors. So a tip or a paw or a down. If our animals can perform these known cues in an environment where they feel a bit stressed and overwhelmed, it's usually a good sign that they can still process. And it's shown you that the dog is able to engage with you despite everything going on around them. But it also gives your dog a little bit of something to fix their minds on, in a sense that we're giving them a process to follow through. So from your dog's perspective, they're thinking, okay, I know how to do this. I got this. Right, I can do this thing. I remember this. This is a reinforcing behavior for me to do. I like this game. And just
Yes.
make sure you give them little bits of time out to do that. And what we want to see is, after these sorts of things, that they have a lovely big shake off and they're relieving all that stress and tension. Like, okay, we can go on again. Just if you're not 100% sure, start building them up now around your local towns or villages, at busier times, or parks, and see how they get on. Watch them like a clock. If they look uncomfortable, be sure that we advocate for your dog and find a safe space to take them away so they can relax and decompress and just cope. If it's all too much, we really need to get them out of there. Maybe have someone lined up who can look after them at home, while you can go back and enjoy shopping at all the stores and all the rest of it. But ultimately, most dogs would prefer short stints at this place with opportunity to take themselves away. So if you're walking with your dog and they don't normally pull, but they're pulling that way towards the open spaces, it means your dog really is saying, I need to get out of here. Or if your dog is overly checking in with you, jumping up on you lots and scrabbling at you, that's usually a sign that they're getting frantic and they're literally saying, I need your help here. Get me out. So
yeah, I think that's brilliant. You can't expect them to go from zero to hero on their very first big outing. I know that you mentioned that Ruby's really good at these events, but it's also from going to markets. I think over Christmas we were bringing her for 1 hour, and then 2 hours, and then 3 hours. And still to this day, we often won't bring her 2 days in a row to events, or she'll come for a full day and a half day, because it gets even her placid nature reaches frustration point at some point as well. So I think that's
yeah,
to give them space. And
yeah,
brilliant.
definitely.
I feel like we could talk for another 7 hours, but I do need
Oh,
to leave
we're
you
not.
alone. Enjoy your evening. Thank you so much for being my first guest on Tuesday Talks series.
It's been an honor.
We'll have to get you back on again to talk about loads of other topics. Guys, thank you also everyone for joining and commenting. I'm really sorry. We were too busy nattering to read most of the comments. I'm really sorry. But I saw people helping each other out in the comment section anyway. So that's what community is all about. If I'll leave you have the last word, no problem at all. I was going to say, if you have enjoyed this, please do go over to Snout and About and give Catherine a follow at Snout and About Cork on Instagram. Am I correct? And if you are not following us already, we're Ruby Reese Official. Sorry, you wanted to make a closing point.
Yes, and I'm so sorry. I wanted to first thank you so much for having me on this first flagship event of yours. And just to finally say, if anybody does have any questions about their behaviour, even if you wanted to open it up as a comment section under your advert for it, I will happily go through those and answer them back one by one. And keep an eye on what we're doing, because we're actually hoping to announce a course designed especially for people who want to get into the training industry, hopefully in a few months' time.
That sounds
fantastic.
If I manage to find time, I might even do it myself. Thank you very, very much once again. I'll post this as a reel, and then the whole comment section will be open. Looking forward to loads of engagement. And once again, a huge big thank you. See you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you, Catherine.